instruments. And the women sang to one another as they celebrated, Saul has struck down his thousands and David his 10,000s. Saul was very angry, and this saying displeased him. He said, they have ascribed to David 10,000s, and to me they have ascribed thousands. And what more can he have but the kingdom? Saul eyed David from that day on. The next day, a harmful spirit from God rushed upon Saul, and he raved within his house while David was playing the lyre, as he did day by day. Saul had his spear in his hand, and Saul hurled the spear, for he thought, I will pin David to the wall. But David evaded him twice. Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with him and had departed from Saul. So Saul removed him from his presence, made him a commander of 1,000, and he went out and came in before the people. And David had success in all his undertakings, for the Lord was with him. When Saul saw that he had great success, he stood in fearful awe of him. I want to move forward to the 19th chapter for a moment. Start reading in verse 8. There was war again, and David went out and fought with the Philistines and struck them with a great blow, so that they fled before him. Then a harmful spirit from the Lord came upon Saul as he sat in his house with his spear in his hand, and David was playing the lyre, and Saul sought to pin David to the wall with the spear, but he eluded Saul, so that he struck the spear into the wall. And David fled and escaped that night. Saul sent messengers to David's house to watch him, that he might kill him in the morning. But Michal, David's wife, told him, if you do not escape with your life tonight, tomorrow you will be killed. So Michal let David down through the window, and he fled away and escaped. Michal took an image and laid it at the bed on the bed, and a pillow of goat's hair at his head, and covered it with the clothes. When Saul sent messengers to take David, she said, he is sick. Saul sent messengers to see David, saying, bring him up to me in the bed, that I may kill him. When the messengers came in, behold, the image was in the bed, and the pillow of goat's hair at his head. And Saul said to Michal, why have you deceived me thus, and let my enemy go, so that he has escaped? Michal answered Saul, he said to me, let me go. Why should I kill you? Now David fled and escaped, and he came to Samuel at Ramah and told him all that Saul had done to him. And he and Samuel went and lived at Naioth. And clearly, as we read these words, we see that Saul was very jealous of the attention that David was receiving. And it transformed his feelings for David. That seeing the success of David and seeing that the people recognized that success and celebrated that success in David changed the feelings of Saul toward David immensely. He had previously taken David into his home, treated him as a favored son. This was a thing that was long in the building, but he was so impressed with this young man that he wouldn't let him go back to his own house. Instead, he lived there with Saul as if he was one of Saul's own children. But now, Saul distrusts him and wants to kill him. And not just want to kill him, not just thinking in the back of his head, boy, I wish something would happen to him. Quite different than that. He wants him dead to the point that he's willing to do it with his own hands. He had a spear close by, and twice in one day he tried to spear David. And then on another occasion he yet does it again. When he fails, he plans, I'm going to go get him in the morning, and I'm going to see that he's dead. When he thinks that David's sick, he tells his servants, I'll tell you what, go pick up his bed, bring me his bed, and I'll kill him while he lays sick on the bed. Now that's pretty bad. He goes from loving David, from providing for David, caring for David, seeing him as equal to his own son Jonathan, to that kind of hatred, that kind of determination to kill him. By the way, we might throw in there that Michal that we've been reading about, that's Saul's daughter, and David's actually the son-in-law. So he literally had taken him into the family. The way he had done that was by giving his daughter as a wife, so he would be part of his family. What I want us to understand in this, or I suppose a better way to say that, is what God's revealing for us to understand, is that we determine our attitude toward people. David hadn't changed. The things that David was doing hadn't changed. Saul loved David when David killed Goliath. Saul loved David when David played the lyre for him and was able to calm his anger. Saul loved David when he did these other things that benefited Saul. And Saul decided that he loved David, that he cared for David, that he wanted David around, brought him to his house, let him live as one of his own children under his roof, provided for him, did all the things that a parent does. He decided that that was his attitude toward David. And then, when he heard the people ascribing more glory to David than to himself, he decided that he didn't like David, that he couldn't trust David. He became paranoid is what he did. He became paranoid that David was going to end up taking his throne away from him. This is not always something that happens because of something that they do. David didn't change in his behavior at all. Sometimes it happens despite what they do. David was doing everything to help Saul, everything to serve Saul, everything to make Saul's kingdom successful, everything that he could possibly do. And despite all that, Saul's attitude toward him completely changed. Now I want to put you in David's situation for a moment. Remembering that David loved Saul. He loved Saul enough to accept the invitation to come and live in his home. And he loved Jonathan like a brother. He loved Saul's daughter as a wife. He incorporated himself into the life of Saul. He wanted what was best for Saul. He wanted for Saul's kingdom to be triumphant. Every time that Saul sent him out to fight, he went out and fought with all that he had so that Saul's kingdom would be victorious. He loved Saul. And you might think that that was because Saul was being so nice to him. Saul was so impressed with the young man that he lavished gifts upon him, and he brought him into his house, and he gave him his daughter as a wife, and he did all of these wonderful things. And David's station kind of rose quite a bit. David was the youngest of a sheep herder in the countryside, and wasn't really all that significant. He wasn't even really old enough to go off into war and battle, and he wasn't considered as anything more than an afterthought by his father, by his brothers, by Saul, by anyone. Even later, when God would send the prophet Samuel to select the man who would reign in Saul's place, God sends him out and sends him to Jesse's house and says, okay, it's one of the boys. They tried every single son of Jesse except David. And when they had seen all the rest of them, they said, it's got to be one of these. There's not anybody left. Well, yeah, I got this one son, but he's my youngest, and he's not all that big. He's just out there watching the sheep. And, of course, we learned that that's the one that God chose. He went from being way down there to being in the king's house, being the king's son-in-law, being the great warrior where the people of the nation danced and celebrated his victories publicly and sang his praises. He's got every reason to be grateful for all that Saul has done for him, but now all of a sudden Saul has gone nuts. And every time he's in the room with Saul, Saul's trying to kill him. And he's plotting behind his back. And if we put ourselves in David's shoes, I would imagine that we would do exactly what you would think that a person would do, and that is, wait a minute, okay, when he was helping me, that was great. But now he's trying to kill me. I don't like him so much anymore. We get angry sometimes with our in-laws over things that they say. They don't even attempt to kill us. They don't even suggest that they want to kill us. We just get our feelings hurt because they complain about something that we've done, or they complain about the way we've cooked something, or they complain about the way we keep the house, or they say that that's not the way I did it, or that we get mad about being disrespected. Listen, David was literally fleeing for his life because Saul had actively tried to kill him. And we could see David getting angry, getting defensive, getting protective, and saying, I'm going to kill him first. But that is not what we see. Though Saul tried to kill David, actively tried to kill David more than once, David did not seek to kill Saul. He made a choice. He made a determination within himself what his attitude towards Saul was going to be, regardless of how Saul had treated him, of what Saul was doing to him, of what Saul was actually actively planning to do to him. Continuously trying to do to him. At this stage of the game, Saul is out there with his soldiers actually trying to chase him down so that he can kill him. So look at 2 Samuel 24 with me. When Saul returned from following the Philistines, he told, behold, David is in the wilderness of En-gedi. Then Saul took 3,000 chosen men out of all Israel and went to seek David and his men in front of the wild goats' rocks. 3,000 choice men. Understand what that means. These are the best of Saul's armies. These are the choicest soldiers. These are the guys who can do the job better than anyone else. And he takes 3,000. Not 30. Not 300. 3,000 of his best soldiers to go track down and kill David. He came to the sheepfolds by the way where there was a cave, and Saul went in to relieve himself. David and his men were sitting in the innermost parts of the cave. So it just so happens that this cave that Saul decides to use as a pit stop is where David is. And they're in the inside, the very recesses of the cave, and Saul comes in and goes about relieving himself. And the men of David say to him, here's the day which the Lord said to you, behold, I'll give your enemy into your hand, and you shall do to him as shall seem good to you. This is the day. This is the day that God promised you. God told you you were going to be king in Saul's place. Here's the opportunity. This has to be the providence of God. That's what they're saying. God brought him here so you can kill him. David arose and stealthily cut off a corner of Saul's robe. That's how close he was. He was close enough to chop off a corner of the man's robe. He was close enough to chop off a corner of the man's robe. He was close enough to chop off his head. Saul had no idea he was there. Saul had no defense. Saul was exposed and ignorant and unarmed. And David chops off a corner of his garment instead of running him through with his sword. Instead of lopping off his head like he did Goliath. Instead of killing him like he did 10,000s of the Philistines. It wasn't that David wasn't able to kill. It wasn't that David was unwilling to kill anyone, because he had killed lots of people at this point. David was a great warrior. You'll recall later on, David wants to build the temple of God, and God says, no, you can't do that. You've got too much blood on your hands. You've killed too many people. That's going to have to be left to one of your sons to do. It's not your work to do, because you've taken too much life. It's not that David's unwilling or unable physically or circumstantially. It's that David's unwilling because of his attitude. David's heart struck him, it says in verse 5, because he had cut off a corner of Saul's robe. I want you to realize what that's saying. It repented David that he had even done such a thing as cut off part of his robe. Now, you know what we might say? Well, look, he had an opportunity to do a whole lot worse than that. That ain't no big deal. Cut off part of his robe. Didn't hurt Saul. Didn't even touch Saul. No big deal. That's not how David looked at it. David realized that what he had done was disrespectful. David realized that what he had done was dishonorable. David realized that what he was done was wrong. He said to his men, the Lord forbid that I should do this thing to my Lord, the Lord's anointed, to put out my hand against him, seeing he is the Lord's anointed. God made him a king. Who am I to fail to show him the respect that he should receive? So David persuaded his men with these words and did not permit them to attack Saul. He wasn't even alone. He could have done it by himself. He didn't. But he had a group of men who had followed him around, who were fighting for him day in and day out, who were killing people constantly, who were ready to die for him, who wanted to take Saul's life, and he persuaded them not to do it. Would not permit them to attack him. And Saul rose up and left the cave and went on his way. Saul had chosen an attitude of envy and jealousy and hatred toward David. David had chosen a very different attitude, to reflect right back on that individual who so hated him and was seeking him harm. Down in chapter 26, if you'll turn a couple of more chapters over, we'll start reading in verse 5. David rose and came to the place where Saul had encamped, and David saw the place where Saul lay with Abner the son of Ner and the commander of his army, and Saul was lying with the encampment while the army was encamped around him. And David said to Ahimelech the Hittite and to Joab's brother Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, who will go down with me into the camp to Saul? And Abishai said, I'll go down with you. And so David and Abishai went to the army by night, and there lay Saul sleeping within the encampment with his spear stuck in the ground at his head. So Saul's laid out, he's sound asleep, and he's without his weapon. Abner and the army lay around him. They're all asleep. All of his protectors are asleep. They're unarmed. They're not ready. Abishai said to David, God has given your enemy into your hand this day. Now please let me pin him to the earth with one stroke of the spear. I'll not strike him twice. He didn't have to. He was ready to take Saul's own spear and run it through him and literally pin him to the earth. David said to Abishai, do not destroy him. For who can put out his hand against the Lord's anointed and be guiltless? David said, as the Lord lives, the Lord will strike him, or his day will come to die, or He will go down in battle and perish. What he's saying there is real simple. Either the Lord's going to take his life through his own power, or he's going to live out his life and just die naturally like all people die, or he will go out to battle and be defeated and die in battle. But what he's saying is he's not going to die by my hand. And again, let us be keenly aware that this is not a man who is afraid to take human life when it's justified, when it's right, and when it's proper. He's taken a lot of people's lives. This is a man who chose to have a different attitude toward Saul than what Saul was showing toward him. This was a man who chose to be the bigger person. This was a man who chose to respect and to honor Saul as a way to respect and honor God. David did not seek to kill his enemy. Well, in this case. Many other cases we can read about with David, because God permitted him, had no reservations about killing his enemy. Quite to the contrary, not only did he not kill him, he just outright honored him. Let's go to the second book of Samuel. 2 Samuel chapter 1 and verse 17 we'll start reading. Samuel has died at this point. Saul has died at this point. And it says, David lamented with this lamentation over Saul. Don't read over that and don't miss what this is saying. A lamentation is grieving. It's sorrow. It's an expression of these things. This was not a man who was rejoicing because his enemy was finally dead. This is not someone, by the way, he had spent every day since that time running for his life. Saul was continually trying to kill him. He never had rest. He never had an easy. He couldn't lay his head down at night without worrying whether or not Saul was going to pop up and do to him the very thing that he had had the opportunity to do to Saul. He didn't celebrate the death of Saul. He lamented the death of Saul. He lamented with this lamentation over Saul and Jonathan his son. He said it should be taught to the people of Judah. So not only did he express this lamentation, but he wanted everyone else in the nation to feel the same way. Your glory, O Israel, is slain on your high places. How the mighty have fallen. Don't miss out on the significance of this. He says to the nation, your glory, that's Saul, has been slain. The mighty has fallen. This is an expression of honor and respect. Tell it not in Gath, publish it not in the streets of Ashkelon, lest the daughters of the Philistines rejoice, lest the daughters of the uncircumcised exult. Don't go publishing this to our enemies because they'll celebrate. This is not a time for celebration. This is a time for lamentation, for weeping, for crying at the loss of our King. You mountains of Gilboa, let there be no dew or rain upon you, nor fields of offerings. For there is a shield of the mighty, or for the shield of the mighty was defiled, and the shield of Saul not anointed with oil. He prays that the dew stop, not just the rain, but the dew stop, because Saul has died. From the blood of the slain, from the fat of the mighty, the bow of Jonathan turned not back, and the sword of Saul returned not empty. Saul and Jonathan, beloved and lovely. In life and in death they were not divided. They were swifter than eagles. They were stronger than lions. Your daughters of Israel weep over Saul, who clothe you luxuriously in scarlet, who put ornaments of gold on your apparel. How the mighty have fallen in the midst of the battle. Jonathan lies slain in your high places. I am distressed for you, my brother Jonathan. Very pleasant you have been to me. Your love to me was extraordinary, surpassing the love of women. How the mighty have fallen, and the weapons of war perished. After this, David inquired of the Lord, shall I go up into any of the cities of Judah? And the Lord said to him, go up. David said, to which shall I go up? And he said, to Hebron. So David went up there, and his two wives also, Ahinoam of Jezreel and Abigail, the widow of Nabal of Carmel. And David brought up his men who were with him, every one with his household, and they lived in the towns of Hebron. The men of Judah came, and there they anointed David king over the house of Judah. When they told David it was the men of Jabesh Gilead who buried Saul, David sent messengers to the men of Jabesh Gilead and said to them, may you be blessed by the Lord, because you showed this loyalty to Saul your Lord and buried him. See, what he's saying here is he found out that these people buried Saul. Instead of making public display of his body, they showed respect to him. And he besought the Lord's blessing upon these people because they showed respect to Saul. David sent messengers to them to tell them that he felt this way. Now he says in verse 6, may the Lord show steadfast love and faithfulness to you. I will do good to you because you've done this thing. See, Saul's dead. It's now time for David to reign. David's going to be king. There's going to be a fight, and it's going to be a mess for a while. But David knows he's going to be king. And this is what he says, because you have done this thing and showed respect and honor to Saul's body, I'm going to do good to you. Let your hands be strong. Be valiant, for Saul your Lord is dead. The house of Judah has anointed me king over them. He honored Saul. He grieved over Saul's death. He appreciated those that showed Saul honor. He provided and cared for the people who showed honor to Saul. That tells you just how much David truly honored his king. David was patient. Though God had expressed that David was to succeed Saul, he waited. We read that a moment ago. The Lord will strike him. His day will come to die. He'll go down in battle and perish. I'm going to wait. I want you to consider some things about patience. Galatians chapter 5 and verse 22. The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness. This arises from God. This is the fruit of the Spirit of God. This is the character of one who is devoted to God. We see it being displayed in David. Romans chapter 12 and verse 17. Repay no one evil for evil, but give thought to do what is honorable in the sight of all. If that doesn't describe how David is behaving, I don't know what does. Saul is actively trying to take his life. He's trying to kill him. He's plotting against him. He's taken one of his wives from him. Yeah, he gave his daughter to someone else, if memory serves me correct. But David doesn't return evil for evil. He gives thought to do what is honorable. He respects life. He respects Saul. He respects the anointing of God. He respects God's control and God's right to seek vengeance. He respects the person of Saul when Saul dies. And he respects those who choose to respect Saul. Repay no one evil for evil, but give thought to do what is honorable in the sight of all. Listen, anybody that saw David saw what honorable behavior looks like. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 and verse 15, see that no one repays anyone evil for evil, but always seek to do good to one another and to everyone. 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 9, do not repay evil for evil or reviling for reviling, but on the contrary, bless. For to this you were called, that you may obtain a blessing. We can learn from David. We can learn from David's attitude. We can learn from David's behavior. We can learn how to treat people, whether they treat us right or not. We can learn how to respect people, whether they respect us or not. We can learn how to do good to people, whether they do good to us or not. We can learn how to celebrate the good things that happen to other people, whether they celebrate the good that happens to us or not. We can learn to overcome evil with good is what we can do. What we find as a result of all these things is that David was established by God. He was established by God because of these things. The Bible is very clear about that. 2 Samuel chapter 5 and verse 10, David became greater and greater, for the Lord, the God of hosts, was with him. Hiram, king of Tyre, sent messengers to David, and cedar trees and carpenters and masons who built David a house. And David knew that the Lord had established him king over Israel, and that he had exalted his kingdom for the sake of his people Israel. Pay very close attention to the end of verse 12. David knew that the Lord had established him. David knew that the Lord had made him king over Israel. David knew that the Lord had exalted his kingdom. David knew that it was for the sake of his people. See, David didn't get the big head. He didn't start thinking that it was about him. He didn't start saying, you know what, I do all this good stuff and I'm so good and I treat people right and so I've been made a great king, and these people over here in Tyre, they're building my castle for me. I didn't even have to build my own house. He didn't do that. He said, number one, I haven't done anything. God's doing it. God's established me. God's made me king. God's established my kingdom. And he didn't do it for me. He did it for the sake of his people. We often try to justify our bad behavior by arguing that the circumstances that we are in, or that the behavior of the other people around us, what people have done to us, that somehow that justifies our evil. Somehow that makes it okay. You shouldn't do that. But you don't know what they did to me. That's just not the case. No matter what happens in this world, no matter what people do, no matter what people say, no matter how they treat me, I'm never at liberty to do what is evil. And beyond that, I'm never at liberty to fail to do what is good and what is right and what is just and what is proper. That's what we learn from these things. We should aspire to be more faithful to God. That's what David proved to be in all this. David was faithful to God. He wasn't faithful to himself. He wasn't even faithful to Saul per se. He was faithful to Saul because of God. And we need to be more faithful to God. The kind of faith that makes me respect those who have charge over me. Whether they're being nice to me or not. Whether they're being fair to me or not. whether I like it or not, or whether it accomplishes the ends that I think are proper. Do you notice the friends of David are constantly saying, hey, hey, this is the day that the Lord's given us? And David says, no, that's not the way it works. I need to wait on the Lord. The world's full of men who diverge from what's right. We can justify bad behavior every day of the week if that's what we're trying to do, because the world is full of people who do bad things. And because you're bad to me, I can be bad right back at you. That's not how it works. If we're looking for our justification to do our evil, we will find our justification to do our evil. But they did this, and they did that, and he started it. You know, we start saying stuff like that when we're 4 years old on the playground at school. 3, 2, and Miss Sheila's helping me out here. He started it. He hit me first. He poked me. That's what we sound like when we start saying, well, I had a right to be rude, to be obnoxious, to be disrespectful. I had a right to not listen because they weren't nice to me. And they started it. We need to learn from David. Because really all we're doing is justifying an excuse to be evil. Truth of the matter is, I stand before God and I answer for the deeds that I do in this body, whether they're good or evil, irrespective of anyone else. The charge given to me by God is not to do good to those who are good to me, but to do good to all men. Romans chapter 12, verses 20 and 21. To the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he's thirsty, give him something to drink. Well, I can't do that. That's going to make me look like a fool. People are going to laugh at me behind my back. They're going to think I'm naive. They're going to think that I don't know what's going on. They're going to think, you know what God says about that? Who cares what they think? Who cares what they don't know? Who cares that they don't know why? And before we start thinking that acting that way makes us look weak and makes us look foolish, let's finish reading what this says. To the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he's thirsty, give him something to drink, for by so doing you'll heap burning coals on his head. Don't be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. So the very best way that I can teach that evildoer that there's a better way is to show him that better way. The very best way that I can help them see and understand that what they've done to me is uncalled for and unjustified is for me to behave in a way that they see that they had no cause. And isn't that what our Lord did? You say you're a king. He says, well, that's what you said about me. My kingdom's not of this world. If it was, then my servants would be fighting. But as it is, it's not of this realm. Don't you understand that I can kill you? They said to Jesus. Jesus said, you couldn't do anything except the Lord gave you the authority to do it. Jesus wasn't naive and he wasn't foolish and he didn't not understand. He overcame evil with good. He did what was right. He did what was just. He did what was necessary. That's the same thing we see in his father David. And they both did it for the same reason. Because they loved God. Because they respected God. Because they feared God. And because they understood that the obligation is to do good and to do what is right and to do what is just at all times, in all circumstances. That's the standard that's been set for us. Yes, it's challenging. Yes, it's frightening. Yes, I fail. That doesn't make my failure okay. And other people's failure doesn't make our failure okay. It drives us to rise up, to admit our failures, and to be determined to do better next time. It drives us to say, I was wrong. I should not have said that. I should not have done that. I should have done what was right. I should have done what was honorable. I should have done what glorifies God. That's what we ought to be driven to do as we seek to live up to this extremely high standard that God has set for us, so that we can truly be lights in this world, so that people can truly look at our good works and glorify God. And realize, you know what, He's not doing that because He's so good. He's doing that because of the God He serves is so good and has demanded such of Him. And we're seeing a reflection of the righteousness and the goodness and the love of God. We love because He first loved. That's what happens